Before we begin, do me a small favor. Close your eyes for just a moment. Can you hear it? That gentle, rhythmic whir of the electric can opener, followed by that satisfying pop as the lid releases. Or maybe it's the smell of onions sizzling in a cast-iron skillet, a scent that promised something hearty and warm was on its way. In today's journey, we are not just remembering food. We are traveling back to the kitchens of 1970s America, a time of resourcefulness and quiet creativity. We'll revisit 20 humble meals that stretched $1 and filled our homes with comfort when times were tough. And stick with us until the end, because we'll talk about a simple dish made from leftovers that, for many of us, tasted more like love than anything else. Time seemed to move differently back then, didn't it? It had a weight, a texture. The hours between school and supper stretched out, filled with neighborhood games and the low murmur of a television in the living room. There was no instant gratification. Dinner wasn't delivered in 30 minutes. It was an event that slowly built throughout the afternoon. The 1970s were a challenging decade for many American families. With rising inflation and the oil crisis, budgets were squeezed tighter than ever before. But this scarcity bred a special kind of wealth. Without the distractions of smartphones and 1,000 channels, the dinner table was our universe. It was where the day's stories were shared, where lessons were learned, and where we connected in a way that feels almost like a lost art today. These simple meals were the glue that held it all together. Let's start with a true icon of the era, a dinner that came straight from a box. Remember Hamburger Helper? The bright red or yellow box with the cheerful four-finger glove lefty promised a complete and satisfying meal. The ritual began with the sound of ground beef browning in the skillet, filling the kitchen with that unmistakable hearty aroma. Then came the magic. You'd pour in the water, the milk, and the contents of those two precious packets, the dry, oddly shaped pasta, and the mysterious orange-hued seasoning powder. The simple act of stirring it all together, watching the sauce thicken and coat every noodle and piece of meat, was a small kitchen miracle. It was a one-pan wonder that saved time and money, a reliable weeknight staple that meant Mom or Dad could put a hot, filling meal on the table even after a long day. It may not have been gourmet, but on a Tuesday night, it tasted like absolute comfort. Now, let's talk about the undisputed king of the potluck and the weeknight casserole, the tuna noodle casserole. This dish was a master class in pantry economics. It started with the holy trinity of 1970s convenience: a can of tuna, a can of Campbell's cream of mushroom soup, and a bag of wide egg noodles. The sound of the manual can opener piercing the lids was the opening act. The smell of the condensed soup, thick and gloppy as it came out of the can, was a promise of creamy things to come. It was all mixed together, perhaps with some frozen peas for color and a claim to nutrition, and poured into that iconic glass Pyrex or Corningware baking dish. But the final touch was the genius of it all. You'd take a bag of Lay's potato chips, crush them right in the bag into a wonderful greasy rubble, and sprinkle them generously over the top. In the oven, they'd become a salty, crunchy crust that was the perfect contrast to the soft, creamy noodles below. Was there any meal more beautifully messy, more quintessentially American than Sloppy Joe's? The name said it all. This wasn't a time for delicate eating. This was a meal you leaned into. For many, the journey began with a can of manwich, a true marvel of the age. Just browning a pound of hamburger and adding that sweet, tangy, tomatoey sauce was enough to create a feast. The aroma would fill the house, a signal that something fun and informal was for dinner. The real challenge and the joy was in the eating. The sauce-laden meat was spooned onto the cheapest, softest, most impossibly white hamburger buns. These buns were never structurally sound enough to contain the filling. Within minutes, the bottom bun would become a soggy, delicious memory, and you'd have to finish your meal with a fork. It was served with a side of potato chips or maybe some canned corn. It was a 5-napkin meal, and we wouldn't have had it any other way. For a quick lunch or a simple supper, few things were as satisfying as a fried bologna sandwich. This was no delicate deli meat. This was a thick, round slice of bologna, often from a large chub that was bought for pennies on the dollar. The secret, as every kid knew, was in the preparation. You had to cut a few slits around the edges of the bologna slice to keep it from curling up into an unrecognizable dome in the pan. The slice would hit the hot, buttered skillet with a sizzle, puffing up in the middle as it cooked. The edges would get wonderfully brown and crispy. 2 slices of that perfectly fried meat were placed between toasted white bread, often Wonder Bread, with a slice of impossibly orange American cheese that would melt slightly from the heat. A smear of French's yellow mustard was non-negotiable. It was simple, salty, and profoundly comforting. Let's journey into a dish with a nickname known to anyone with a family member in the military. Creamed chipped beef on toast, or, as it was more commonly called, SOS. This was the epitome of stretching ingredients. It often came from a small glass jar packed with thin, salty, air-dried sheets of beef. You'd rinse the beef to remove some of the intense saltiness, then chop it and add it to a simple white gravy. That gravy, or bechamel if you were feeling fancy, was nothing more than butter, flour, and milk whisked together in a pan until it was smooth and thick. The whole concoction was then ladled hot and steaming over 2 pieces of plain toasted white bread placed side by side on a plate. The toast would immediately begin to soften under the weight of the creamy, savory gravy. It wasn't pretty, but it was warm, filling, and incredibly cheap to make. It was a taste of history served on a plate. In the world of 1970s, frugal cooking, ground beef was king, and porcupine meatballs were one of its most clever disguises. Why the name? Because uncooked long-grain rice was mixed directly into the raw ground beef along with chopped onions and seasonings. As the meatballs simmered in a simple tomato sauce, usually made from canned soup or tomato juice, the rice would cook and poke out from the surface, making them look like little porcupines. It was a brilliant way to stretch a pound of meat to feed a whole family, as the rice added bulk and texture. These weren't the light, airy Italian meatballs of a fancy restaurant. They were dense, hearty, and substantial. They would bubble away on the stovetop for what felt like hours, filling the house with a comforting, savory aroma. Served over mashed potatoes or buttered noodles, it was a meal that stuck to your ribs. No culinary tour of the 1970s would be complete without paying homage to the wobbly, shimmering, and often bewildering world of the Jell-O salad. This was an era where gelatin was not just for dessert. It was a vehicle for all manner of ingredients. Lime Jell-O was the classic base. into which a host of unlikely companions were suspended in time. Shredded carrots, crushed pineapple from a can, chopped celery, and sometimes, for a truly festive touch, miniature marshmallows. For a creamier texture, a scoop of cottage cheese or even mayonnaise might be blended in. It was then poured into a decorative mold, perhaps shaped like a fish or a ring, and chilled in the refrigerator until firm. The moment of truth was flipping the mold over onto a bed of iceberg lettuce, hoping it would release in one perfect, jiggly piece. It was sweet, it was savory, it was baffling, and it was on every holiday table. This next dish is a perfect example of how American home cooks adapted and simplified traditional recipes. We're talking about American goulash. This was not the rich paprika-spiced stew of Hungary. This was a one-pot weeknight miracle. It was a comforting mix of ground beef, onions, and garlic, browned in a large pot. Then came the cans, diced tomatoes, tomato sauce, maybe some beef broth. The final and most crucial ingredient was elbow macaroni, which was poured in dry and cooked directly in the simmering sauce. This not only saved a pot, but also allowed the pasta to absorb all the savory, tomatoey flavor. A little bit of cheese might be stirred in at the end to make it extra rich. It was a simple, hearty, and incredibly inexpensive way to feed a crowd of hungry kids on a cold evening. Every family had their own slight variation, a secret ingredient that made it theirs. Let's talk about a product that truly defined an era of home cooking: shake and bake. The television commercials were unforgettable, with the kids proudly proclaiming, "And I helped." It promised the crispy, crunchy texture of fried chicken without the mess and fat of a deep fryer. The kit came with 2 parts, a plastic shaker bag and a packet of seasoned breadcrumbs. The process was a ritual. You'd drop a piece of chicken into the bag, close the top, and then came the best part, shaking it with all your might. It was a job often delegated to the youngest members of the family. The chicken pieces, now perfectly coated in that fine, savory dust, were arranged on a baking sheet and cooked until golden brown. The smell that filled the house was a unique blend of herbs, spices, and roasting chicken. It made ordinary, inexpensive chicken parts feel like a special occasion. In an age before fancy juice boxes and artisanal sodas, there was a drink that captured the imagination of a generation. It was Tang. Marketed as the drink of the astronauts, this bright orange powder was a staple in almost every kitchen pantry. The ritual was simple but satisfying. You'd scoop the fine, citrus-smelling powder into a large glass pitcher, add cold water, and stir. The magic was watching the water instantly transform into a vibrant, almost unnaturally orange liquid. The sound of the long-handled iced teaspoon clinking against the glass pitcher is a sound many of us can still hear. It was sweeter than real orange juice and had a distinct, tangy flavor all its own. For kids of the space age, drinking a glass of Tang felt like taking a small sip of the future. It was an affordable treat that made an ordinary summer afternoon feel a little more exciting. When the budget was especially tight, but you needed to put a hearty meal on the table, many mothers and fathers turned to an old, humble classic: liver and onions. Now, this is a dish that divides people, but for those who grew up with it, it holds a special place. The process always started with slicing a large yellow onion into rings and slowly sautéing them in butter or bacon grease until they were soft, sweet, and caramelized. The aroma alone was intoxicating. Then came the beef liver, dredged in seasoned flour and carefully pan-fried until it was browned on the outside, but still tender within. The key was not to overcook it. Served with a pile of mashed potatoes and perhaps a side of canned green beans, it was a meal packed with iron and flavor. It was a taste from a different time, a reminder of when no part of the animal was wasted and simple ingredients were cooked with care. Long before the gourmet ramen craze, there were a few pennies per package meals that every family kept in the cupboard for emergencies. One of these was egg drop soup from a Lipton or Knorr packet. It felt exotic and different from the usual chicken noodle or tomato soup. The packet contained a salty, savory chicken-flavored powder that you would mix with water and bring to a boil. Then came the magical and slightly tricky part. You'd beat an egg in a small bowl, and then, while stirring the simmering broth in a circular motion, you would slowly drizzle the egg in. It would instantly cook into delicate silken ribbons that floated in the soup. It was a simple 2-minute transformation that felt like a culinary magic trick. On a day when you were feeling under the weather, a hot, salty bowl of this simple soup was one of the most comforting things in the world. Let's talk about the quintessential side dish that came from a box, a product that proudly called itself the San Francisco treat. Of course, I mean rice-a-roni. This was so much more than just rice. The box contained a mix of long-grain rice and broken pieces of vermicelli pasta. The first step was crucial. You had to sauté the rice and pasta mixture in butter or margarine until the vermicelli turned a beautiful golden brown. This step filled the kitchen with a nutty, toasty aroma that was the signature of the dish. Then you'd add the water and the contents of the precious seasoning packet. As it simmered on the stove, the rice would become fluffy and the pasta tender, all of it infused with that uniquely savory, slightly salty flavor. It was the standard accompaniment to baked chicken or pork chops. An easy way to make any meal feel a little more complete and special. The Salisbury steak is a true monument to mid-century American comfort food. While we might remember them most from frozen TV dinners nestled in their little plastic trays, the homemade version was a budget-friendly triumph. It was essentially a seasoned ground beef patty, often mixed with breadcrumbs and onion, shaped into an oval to mimic a real steak. These patties were then pan-fried and smothered in a rich brown gravy, usually made with onions and mushrooms. This wasn't a dish about subtlety. It was about hearty, savory flavor. The gravy was the star, a comforting blanket that soaked into everything on the plate. It was almost always served with a generous scoop of mashed potatoes, creating the perfect vessel for that delicious gravy. It was a working-class hero of a meal, turning a humble pound of ground beef into something that felt substantial and satisfying. No holiday gathering or church potluck in the 1970s was complete without a large, glittering bowl of ambrosia salad. This was less of a salad and more of a glorious sweet concoction that straddled the line between side dish and dessert. The recipes varied from family to family, a closely guarded secret passed down through generations. But the core ingredients were almost always the same: canned mandarin oranges, drained of their syrup, canned pineapple chunks, miniature marshmallows, and sweetened flake coconut. The binder that brought it all together was either sour cream or the miracle ingredient of the era, Cool Whip. It was all gently folded together in a big bowl and chilled until serving. The result was a sweet, creamy, and surprisingly refreshing dish that kids adored. It was a taste of pure, unadulterated sweet nostalgia. Let's turn our attention to an appetizer, a party food, and a perfect way to use up leftover eggs. Deviled eggs. They were a fixture on every relish tray and at every family get-together. The process was a familiar dance. You'd hard-boil a dozen eggs, then carefully peel them under cool, running water. The eggs were sliced in half lengthwise, and the bright yellow yolks were scooped out into a bowl. This was where the magic happened. The yolks were mashed with a fork until they were a fine powder, then mixed with a generous amount of mayonnaise, a dab of mustard, and a splash of vinegar. Some families added a little sweet pickle relish for extra tang. The creamy, fluffy filling was then spooned or piped back into the hollowed-out egg whites. The final essential touch was a sprinkle of paprika on top, adding a dash of color and a hint of smoky flavor. They were the first thing to disappear at any party. When it came to meat, you couldn't get much cheaper or more convenient than a small can of Vienna sausages. These tiny, soft sausages, packed in a gelatinous broth, were a pantry staple. There was a certain ritual to opening the can, carefully peeling back the metal lid with the attached key. For a quick snack, kids would eat them straight from the can, speared with a fork. But they could also be turned into a simple hot meal. A favorite preparation was to slice them into little coins and add them to a can of pork and beans, heating it all up on the stove. Another classic was to wrap them in biscuit or crescent roll dough from a tube, creating impromptu pigs in a blanket. They were a humble ingredient, to be sure, but their versatility and low cost made them a go-to for quick lunches or simple dinners when the cupboards were otherwise bare. Shepherd's pie, or its cousin cottage pie if made with beef, was the ultimate comfort food and a brilliant way to use up leftovers. It was a complete meal in a single dish. The bottom layer consisted of cooked ground meat, often mixed with leftover gravy, and a medley of vegetables like carrots, peas, and corn, frequently from a frozen or canned mix. This savory, hearty base was then topped with a thick, fluffy blanket of mashed potatoes. This was a great way to use up potatoes that were a day or two old. The top was often scored with the tines of a fork to create little peaks and valleys, and dotted with butter. Baked in the oven until the filling was bubbly and the potato crust was golden brown, it was a beautiful sight. Serving it was a joy, scooping through the crispy potato topping to reveal the rich, savory filling beneath. It was warmth and comfort in a casserole dish. The tuna melt holds a special place in the pantheon of classic American sandwiches. It was a diner staple that was easily replicated in the home kitchen for a fast, hot, and satisfying lunch. It took the simple tuna salad sandwich to a whole new level. You'd start with a classic tuna salad made with canned tuna, mayonnaise, and perhaps some chopped celery or onion. This mixture was then spread generously onto a slice of bread. The crucial next step was to top it with a slice of American or Swiss cheese. The second slice of bread went on top. The whole sandwich was buttered on the outside, and it was grilled in a pan or on a griddle. The goal was to get the bread golden brown and crispy, while the cheese inside melted into a gooey, delicious layer that enveloped the tuna salad. It was the perfect combination of textures and temperatures. Finally, let's remember a dish that was born from pure frugality, a testament to not letting a single scrap go to waste. I'm talking about chicken and biscuits. This meal often began the day after a Sunday roasted chicken dinner. Any leftover chicken was pulled from the bones and shredded. This meat was then added to a creamy gravy, often made using canned cream of chicken soup and perhaps some leftover vegetables. The real stars, however, were the biscuits. They were either made from scratch using Bisquick, or more often, they came from a refrigerated tube that you'd satisfyingly pop open by pressing a spoon against the seam. The biscuits were baked until golden, then split open and placed on a plate. The hot, creamy chicken mixture was ladled generously over the top, soaking into the fluffy biscuit. It was more than just a meal made from leftovers. It was a promise that even from yesterday's meal, something warm, new, and wonderful could be created. As we come to the end of our journey, it becomes clear, doesn't it? We don't necessarily miss the taste of fried bologna or the curious texture of a Jell-O salad. What we truly long for is the feeling of that time. We miss the world that meal was served in, a world where the family gathered, where a simple hot meal on the table was a symbol of love and security. We miss our younger selves sitting at that table, believing that those evenings would last forever. These frugal foods were more than just sustenance. They were the backdrop to our lives, the quiet testament to the resilience and love of the parents who raised us. Thank you for walking down this memory lane with us today. If these stories resonated with you, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing for more journeys into our shared past. And now, for you. What was the one humble meal from your childhood that you will never, ever forget? Tell us your story in the comments below. We truly can't wait to read it.